My time in Ravenwood Manor. My name is Sarah Bennett, and my husband David and I recently moved into a grand old mansion in Ravenwood, Virginia. Ravenwood Manor had been abandoned for years before we purchased it, drawn by its stately architecture and rich history. Little did we know, it also came with a haunting past. The first few weeks in Ravenwood Manor were like a dream. The house, with its high ceilings and intricate woodwork, was stunning. We spent our days renovating and decorating, turning the ancient manor into our dream home. The locals, however, avoided the house, whispering about its dark history and the spirit that supposedly haunted it. One evening, as I was unpacking boxes in the library, I found an old journal hidden behind a row of dusty books. It belonged to a woman named Eleanor Whitfield, who had lived in the house in the early 1900s. As I read her entries, I discovered that Eleanor had suffered greatly during her time in Ravenwood Manor. Eleanor's husband, Richard, had been a wealthy but cruel man. According to her journal, he had locked Eleanor in the attic for weeks at a time, punishing her for imagined slights. She wrote of feeling watched, of hearing whispers in the night, and of seeing shadows move in the corners of her vision. Her final entry was a plea for help, written just days before she disappeared without a trace. I felt a chill run down my spine as I closed the journal. That night I was jolted awake by a loud thud coming from the attic. David was still asleep, so I decided to investigate on my own. As I climbed the creaky stairs, the air grew colder, and my heart raced with fear. When I reached the attic, I saw a shadowy figure standing by the window. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered, old-fashioned gown. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow. I froze in place, unable to move or scream. The figure turned slowly to face me, and I felt a wave of intense sadness wash over me. I managed to whisper, "Eleanor?" The figure nodded slowly, then pointed to a corner of the attic. I followed her gesture and saw an old trunk. Inside, I found a collection of letters and photographs, along with a small, ornate box. The letters revealed that Richard had indeed been abusive, and that Eleanor had been planning to escape with her lover, a man named James. The box contained a locket with a picture of Eleanor and James, along with a small note that read, "Together forever, in life and death." It was clear that Eleanor had loved James deeply, and that their plan to escape had been thwarted. As I closed the box, the shadowy figure of Eleanor began to fade. She gave me a sad smile before disappearing completely. The next day, I showed David the journal and the letters. He was just as disturbed as I was, and we decided to do some research on the history of the house. We discovered that Richard had been found dead in the house, an apparent suicide, shortly after Eleanor's disappearance. There were rumors that Eleanor's spirit had driven him to madness, but her body was never found. We decided to hold a small ceremony in the attic, placing the locket and the letters in a box and burying it in the garden. As we said a prayer for Eleanor's soul, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The house felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. Since that day, we haven't experienced any strange occurrences in Ravenwood Manor. The oppressive atmosphere is gone, replaced by a sense of tranquility. I like to think that Eleanor has finally found peace, and that she and James are together at last. Months later, I received a call from a local historian who had heard about our experience. He was fascinated by the story and wanted to document it for his research on haunted locations. He came to visit us, and we shared everything we had discovered about Eleanor and Richard. The historian, Dr. Thomas, was particularly interested in the letters we found. He believed they could provide clues about other unresolved hauntings in the area. As we discussed the details, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if Eleanor's story was not yet completely resolved. One evening, while Dr. Thomas was still visiting, we decided to explore the attic once more. We hoped to find any additional evidence that might help us understand Eleanor's plight better. As we searched through the dusty relics, I stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the floorboards. Inside, there was a small, tattered book, Eleanor's diary from her final days. The diary revealed that Eleanor had been desperate to escape Richard's abuse. She wrote about secret meetings with James and their plans to run away together. On the night of their planned escape, Richard had discovered their intentions. In a fit of rage, he had confronted Eleanor, leading to a tragic altercation. Eleanor's last entry was a heart-wrenching farewell to James, expressing her undying love and regret that they could not be together in life. As I read her words, tears filled my eyes. I could feel her pain and sorrow, as if she were standing beside me. Dr. Thomas suggested we hold a more formal ceremony to honor Eleanor and James. We gathered in the garden, where we had buried the locket and letters. This time, we invited a local priest to bless the ground and say a few words for the departed souls. As the priest recited the prayers, the air grew warm, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It felt as though Eleanor's spirit was finally at peace. Dr. Thomas recorded the entire event, hoping it would bring some closure to the haunting legend of Ravenwood Manor. In the weeks that followed, the house continued to feel peaceful and welcoming. We no longer sensed any presence or heard whispers in the night. Ravenwood Manor had become a true home for us, free from the shadows of the past. Though we never forgot Eleanor and James, we felt comforted knowing they were together in the afterlife. The story of Ravenwood Manor became a local legend, and visitors often came to hear the tale of love, tragedy, and redemption. And so, the spirit of Ravenwood Manor was finally laid to rest, allowing us to live our lives in peace and happiness. The Haunting of Oakwood House. My name is Emily Thompson, and I recently moved into Oakwood House, a beautiful Victorian mansion in Oakwood, Massachusetts. After inheriting the house from my great-aunt Lydia, I decided to leave my apartment in the city behind and start a new chapter in my life. Oakwood House, with its charming architecture and expansive gardens, seemed like the perfect place to do so. However, I soon discovered that the house had a dark, hidden history. The first few days in Oakwood House were uneventful. I spent my time cleaning and unpacking, trying to get a feel for the place. Despite its age, the house was in remarkably good condition. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I would often hear soft footsteps echoing through the hallways and feel a cold breeze pass by, even when all the windows were closed. One evening, as I was exploring the attic, I stumbled upon an old trunk. Inside, I found a collection of letters, photographs, and a faded diary. The letters were addressed to my great-aunt Lydia from a woman named Abigail, who had lived in the house in the late 1800s. Intrigued, I began to read Abigail's diary, hoping to learn more about the history of Oakwood House. Abigail's entries were filled with tales of sorrow and despair. She wrote about her husband, Samuel, who had become increasingly distant and cruel after the death of their daughter, Elizabeth. Abigail described how Samuel would lock himself in his study for days, muttering to himself and writing frantically in his journal. She also mentioned hearing whispers in the night and seeing shadows moving around the house. The final entry in Abigail's diary was the most chilling. She wrote of a terrible night when Samuel had gone mad, accusing her of conspiring against him. In his rage, he had taken her life, along with his own. The diary ended with a plea for help, as Abigail felt her soul would never find peace. After reading the diary, I felt a deep sadness for Abigail and a growing sense of dread about Oakwood House. That night, I was awoken by the sound of crying coming from the attic. Gathering my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way upstairs. As I entered the attic, the air grew colder, and I could see my breath in the beam of the flashlight. In the corner of the attic, I saw a shadowy figure of a woman, her face obscured by darkness. She was weeping softly, her shoulders shaking with sorrow. I took a step closer, and the figure looked up, revealing a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes. I froze, unable to move or speak. "Abigail," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure nodded slowly, then pointed to a spot on the floor. I followed her gesture and noticed a loose floorboard. With shaking hands, I pried it open and found a small, leather-bound journal inside. It was Samuel's journal, filled with his descent into madness. He had become obsessed with dark rituals, believing they would bring Elizabeth back to life. His writings were erratic and disturbing, revealing his growing insanity. Realizing that Abigail's spirit was trapped in the house, I decided to help her find peace. I spent the next few days researching the history of the house and contacting local historians. Despite my efforts, I found no clear solution to release Abigail's spirit. The strange occurrences continued. Every night, I would hear the sound of crying and feel a cold presence near me. One particularly cold night, I woke to find the shadowy figure of Abigail standing at the foot of my bed. She looked at me with such sorrow that it broke my heart. I knew I had to do something more. One day, while walking through the local cemetery, I found Abigail's gravestone, overgrown and neglected. I spent hours cleaning it, talking to her as if she were there. I told her that I believed her story and that I would do whatever it took to help her find peace. That night, I returned to the house feeling a strange sense of hope. However, as I lay in bed, the feeling of dread returned. The whispers were louder, the footsteps more pronounced. I could feel Abigail's desperation. A few days later, I decided to leave Oakwood House. I packed my belongings, leaving behind everything that reminded me of the haunting. As I drove away, I glanced back at the mansion, seeing Abigail's figure in the window. I whispered a silent goodbye, hoping that someday someone would be able to help her find the peace she deserved. Oakwood House still stands, a beautiful mansion with a tragic past. Every now and then, I hear stories from new occupants about strange occurrences, and I wonder if Abigail is still there, waiting for someone to help her move on. As for me, I've found a new place to call home, but the memories of Oakwood House and Abigail's sorrowful spirit will stay with me forever. The Haunting of Lawson House. My name is Michael Carter, and my wife Lisa and I recently moved into a beautiful Victorian house in Asheville, North Carolina. The house had a charm that was hard to resist, with its wraparound porch, tall windows, and sprawling garden. We were excited to start our new life there, envisioning it as the perfect place to raise our future children. However, from the moment we moved in, something felt off. Initially, it was small things: doors opening on their own, lights flickering, and strange cold spots that seemed to follow us around. We chalked it up to the quirks of an old house, but soon the incidents escalated. One night, we heard a loud crash coming from the basement. Lisa was too frightened to go down, so I grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the dark, musty space. The temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath in the beam of the flashlight. At the bottom of the stairs, I found an old, dusty mirror that had fallen off the wall. As I lifted it back into place, I noticed something strange in the reflection: a shadowy figure standing behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart pounded as I hurried back upstairs, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. The next day, I decided to investigate the history of the house. I discovered that it was built in the late 1800s by Henry Lawson, a wealthy businessman. Henry's life had been marked by tragedy. His wife, Margaret, had died under mysterious circumstances, and his 2 children had vanished without a trace. Henry himself had died in the house, reportedly of a broken heart. Local legends claimed that his spirit still roamed the halls, searching for his lost family. That evening, we set up a small altar in the living room, placing candles and photographs of the Lawson family that we had found in the attic. We lit the candles and sat in silence, hoping for some sign from Henry. The room grew colder, and we could feel a presence around us. "Henry," I called out softly, "we know you're here. We want to help you find peace. Please show us a sign." The candles flickered, and we heard a faint whisper. "Margaret, the children." The voice was filled with sorrow, and we felt a deep sense of sadness. We decided to explore the attic further, searching for any clues about what had happened to Margaret and the children. Hidden behind a wall panel, we found an old, locked chest. Inside, we discovered letters and journals that told a heartbreaking story. Margaret had been suffering from a severe illness, and in her despair she had taken her own life and the lives of her children. Henry had found them too late, and the guilt and grief had consumed him. He had spent the rest of his life searching for a way to reunite with his family in the afterlife. With this new understanding, we held another ceremony, this time in the attic. We placed the letters and photographs in a small box and buried it in the garden, along with a note asking for peace for the Lawson family. As we finished the ceremony, we felt a sense of release. The air seemed lighter, and the oppressive atmosphere was gone. After the ceremony, we decided to document our experience. I reached out to a local historian, Dr. Emily Harris, who had shown interest in the house's history. She visited us, and we shared everything we had discovered. Dr. Harris was fascinated by the story and suggested we explore the basement, where the disturbances had started. In the basement, we found an old, hidden room. Inside, there were more letters and a small, intricately carved box. The letters were from Henry to Margaret, expressing his undying love and his despair over losing her and the children. The box contained a locket with pictures of the Lawson family and a note that read, "Together forever, in life and death." It was clear that Henry's love for his family had transcended death. We decided to hold a final ceremony, this time with Dr. Harris's help. We buried the locket and letters in the garden, hoping to bring closure to the restless spirits. As we said our final prayers, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, and the atmosphere in the house changed. It felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted, and a sense of peace settled over us. From that day on, we experienced no further disturbances. The house, once filled with sorrow and despair, became a place of love and tranquility. We believed that Henry had finally found peace, reunited with his beloved Margaret and their children. The haunting had ended, leaving behind a sense of serenity that we cherished. Dr. Harris documented our story, and it became a local legend, attracting visitors who were fascinated by the tale of love, loss, and redemption. Our house, once a place of haunting, had become a symbol of enduring love and the power of forgiveness.